Hi, welcome back to the channel and thanks for joining me. So today's video is, to be honest, one I've been very excited about for a long time, ever since this was announced, and I shall show you what was announced and what's just arrived. So Genesis, A Trick of the Tail, Analogue Productions 75th anniversary of Atlantic Records, 45 RPM cut by Chris Bellman at Bernie Grumman Mastering. And well, I have to tell you a bit of a story about Trick of the Tail because it's kind of extremely important to me. So if we just wind back in time about 46 years, closer to 46 years, to a town in Hampshire in England, Winchester, which was once upon a time the capital of Wessex, which was a part of England before England was unified. So you could kind of call it the capital of England in ancient times. Anyway, W.H. Smith's was, still is sort of a stationery newsagent's bookseller, retailer. But back in those days, they had a very good record department. And on my 15th birthday, in 1979, I trundled down to W.H. Smith's and I bought a copy of A Trick of the Tail. And that was my first vinyl LP purchase, bar none. You know, that was it, number one. And I went home and I played it and I was absolutely, utterly blown away. Even though I was playing it on a Fidelity UA4, I think, which was an absolutely horrendous 1970s equivalent of a Crosley, to be perfectly honest. And I don't mean to insult anyone with a Crosley, but if that's what you're using to play your records on, go and get something better, because you'll be damaging them and you will not appreciate how good they sound at all. But anyway, here we are, Trick of the Tail. Now, this isn't that original record that I bought 46 years ago. This is actually one I later on replaced it with, because this is a first issue. And we'll get to this in a bit when we talk about the sound quality. But I mean, look at the run out groove on that side, on side one. It's tiny. It's a lot of music to pack onto one album. And as I say, we'll get onto this as we progress through this video. So this is I'll show you this again. So that's the original, that is the original label for Trick of the Tail, which we call the Small Hatter. And we've talked about this before in videos. You can see that Mad Hatter's hand is well above the spindle hole. On the Large Hatter, which preceded this label, his fingers and the tip of his bow tie kind of touch the spindle hole. Okay, so that's the original label. Important to remember, this is the Charisma label. Charisma, obviously Genesis is a UK band. The label they were on was Charisma. And it was only in America that they were on Atlantic. So, an Atlantic Genesis is not, it's the original US pressing, but it's not the original, if you like. Now, this is the inner sleeve, as you can see here. Kind of quite beautiful. That's the outer of the gatefold. All these characters feature in the stories. I say the stories, the songs, the stories, same thing, because it is it's just a wonderful musical construct, if you like. Bear in mind, this is the first LP I bought. This, to me, kind of formulated the whole rest of my life, almost, And then here's the lyrics, which I will have learnt by heart and written down all over my school exercise book covers and the like. That was kind of the thing to do back then, if you're a geek like me. Anyway, that was my original. And we'll talk about the sound quality of this later on in this video. I subsequently bought this. Now this is the Mofi copy of A Trick of the Tail, and again very similar, as you can see. You don't get the original, you don't get the inner sleeve, but what you do get, which I kind of quite like, I find these quite entertaining, and anyone who collects old Mofis will recognise these kind of Shakespearean adverts for the label. And there we go. And of course, this one is listed as Atco, which is a brand of Atlantic, and of course in America, Genesis were on Atlantic, certainly at that time. I don't know what subsequently happened in terms of labels and all the rest. In the UK, they went to Virgin in the mid-80s. Anyway, so this is the Mofi, and this, I've kind of flipped between the two. As you can see, interestingly, you can see here the terrible fading on the spine of this copy. But I will talk about the colours of these, because that is one little thing I want to mention here. So this is the brand new one now, the wonderful brand new one, which has just arrived with me this last week, and I've just spent the last couple of days playing over and over, really quite loud, and been left as a pool of bubbling tears, let's say. Now, honestly, it's had me in floods of tears. It's stunning, staggering, and wonderful. You can hear that wonderful crunch as you open up this cover. The cover here is absolutely beautiful. It is textured. Interestingly enough, my original, I'm absolutely sure this is an original, isn't. And but it's really nicely done. The cover, absolutely beautiful. It's good and solid and heavy. I will just point out, if you look at the colour of the three of these, I think if anything, it's a bit pale compared with the originals. But there's good sort of contrast between, if you look at the burglar here, there's good contrast. Compare that with the original. So I don't know. I'm not picking holes in it. Even the Genesis, I think this is possibly nicer than the original. Well, this is subjective, isn't it? I think it is nicer than the original. Whether it's authentic or accurate to the original is another matter. I don't know. Anyway, I ain't complaining, I'm just pointing out differences here. And then, of course, as I've said, and this is the real key here, this is cut at 45 RPM by Chris Bellman at Bernie Grundman Mastering, and pressed onto two 45 RPM LPs. And you remember I showed you on the original the tiny little run out groove on side one. On this record here, you've got two tracks aside. See the size of the run out groove there. They're really, everything's staying in the sort of the optimum fidelity area of the disc. Plus it's playing at 45 RPM, which gives you significantly greater potential for better sound quality. And it's pressed at QRP, Chad Kassam's own record pressing plant, and all the elements are absolutely in the right place. Okay, so the acid test, so to speak, how does it sound? Staggering is really, staggering says it all. I think in order to really kind of get across how it sounds, I've got to talk about these other two first, because as I say, it's I've had no record longer than, no album longer than this. First single I actually went out and bought was Follow You, Follow Me, which was I will have bought a year before I bought this. And at that time I didn't have the money for an album, so it was I was waiting for my 15th birthday to get my birthday money and go out and buy this. My big brother Richard, he had it on vinyl, and that's where I really got to know it. and got to know Genesis and Yes and Supertramp and Jethro Tull and Pink Floyd, and you know, I've got to thank my brother for really leading me, you know, not actively, passively. It was when he was out, I went through his record collection, you know. But anyway, so the original is very, very, very kind of light and spacious and sort of ethereal. If we talk about Dance on a Volcano, the first track, you'll remember there's sort of like I think it's 12-string guitar, and it's sort of, you know, picking between channels, and then you get the sort of the drum rolling across, and then the bass just thunders in with just immense weight and power, and you know, the song kind of takes off. Now, when you play the original, those first sort of you know, sort of picked 12-string notes, it's sort of, and then the bass sort of, sorry, then the drums, I think it is run from left to right or right to left, and the bass just thunders in really, really powerfully. That's a great way of just describing the whole thing, because on the original, it is very, very wide and spacious. Now, if we compare the Mofi, how that differs is it's not quite as wide and it's not quite as airy as the original, but what it does have is there's more weight and there's more body. So although the soundstage isn't quite as big and it's not quite as airy, it's kind of more solid, and in a way it sounds more like you're listening to a band in a studio. Now, that's kind of good and bad. I think with Genesis and prog in general, I think my thing is it isn't your typical kind of rock music where you've got, you know, bass guitar and drums. They're really, I mean, I don't think prog was a word or wasn't a word thrown at music back in the day when I first got into this. It's sort of, you know, a derogatory term that was sort of thrown at them sometime after. I used to think of this as classical rock or orchestral rock or symphonic rock or something like that. There's something is far, far, far more kind of density in the composition, and that I don't mean that in terms of density just like, you know, Motorhead or Nirvana or something like that. I mean density in terms of like just, you know, imagine a classical music score. So Hackett's guitar, it's not just sort of wailing guitar solos, it's tiniest little delicate touches. And that's all the elements together, very much like an orchestral arrangement, build a whole that isn't necessarily to be seen as, you know, bass, guitar, drums, keyboards. It's creating a thing, and of course, you know, with I think in these days it was pretty much still analog synthesizers, but what's Tony Banks credited as playing here, for instance? Pianos, synthesizers, organ, mellotron, 12-string guitar and backing vocals. So, you know, you've got elements of a choir, and I think I talked about in a previous video about the Deutsche Grammophon, about the Daphnis and Chloe and that kind of, you know, the Star Trek choir kind of thing. And it's you know, it's those sorts of things. I mean, that will almost certainly, I guess, have been Tony on his mellotron, I guess. But it is to me, this is like classical music played by a rock band, if you like. And it's substance is so much more. And you know, as I say, that's what I kind of cut my teeth on, so to speak. Now, therefore, losing some of that kind of ethereal, kind of spacious, airy, kind of hypnotic, floating you away into a dreamland kind of aspect, and replacing it with a kind of a nailed down in the studio type of rock band aspect, there are pros and cons, and I would be very, very, very hard pushed to tell you which one I preferred out of these two. And really, that's why I've still got the two of them, because, you know, I appreciate aspects of both, but I couldn't live with only one of them, if you see what I mean, having heard them both. So, how does this stunning, amazing, phenomenal Analogue Productions Atlantic 75 version sound? Right, well, from that beginning, I'd say you've got the almost the width and size of soundstage of the original, almost. Maybe just a gnat's whisker less. But you've got the solidity and the weight and the body and the richness of the Mofi, at least. In fact, I would say you've got more, but for now, let's just say that you've got the body and the weight of the Mofi, and you've got the spaciousness of the original. And as we go through, you know, I mean, Dance on a Volcano is, you know, is an amazing song, phenomenal opener. And remember, this, of course, is the first Genesis album without Peter Gabriel on it. So, you know, I guess at the time, and I wasn't following them at the time, I probably first heard this, I'm guessing in 77, when my brother probably got it, I think in 77. You know, but the anticipation at the time must have been huge. And it's just, you know, what a way to open an album. Absolutely, what a way to open an album. And it's got tremendous power. I mean, the recording technology had sort of improved, I think, over the last 2 years since The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, quite notably. You know, the sound of this one is in another league above all of the Gabriel era albums in terms of its sound quality. The power and the spaciousness and the kind of the harmonic kind of rendering, if you like, and the way, I mean, one of the things I think about Genesis is you know, your keyboards and your guitar. I mean, Steve Hackett is not just the thrashy kind of guitar hero type merchant. It's just all these tiny little, you know, he can wail and do it with the best of them, but it's the tiny little touches and the sort of the little, you know, deep, 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 kind of just little things that he's doing, which are just adding a nuance to, say, the keyboards. It's just spellbinding, and you hear more of that. I'd say you'd hear more of that than you do even on the Mofi. So in terms of hearing a band in a studio laying down music, you hear even more. So like on Phil's vocals, for instance, and because it was, you know, he was, you know, the first time he'd ever stepped up as a frontman vocalist, and you know, he did a phenomenal job. But I think to kind of cover for the slightly sort of thin, sort of reedy aspect of his vocals, and to sort of bring a bit more sort of richness to his voice, to kind of, you know, we've just lost Gabriel, so we you know, we want to follow on as best we can. There's a lot of sort of reverb, double tracking over, you know, those sorts of analog, you know, vocal treatments, and you know, don't get me wrong, this is not anything remotely like what goes on now with digital kind of vocal manipulation, but or abomination, maybe I should call it. But it's, you know, you hear all of that, but it's not, listening into it on this version, it's not like listening in, it really isn't. Let's just say, I keep going back to these two, but this is like an either or. It's, you know, you hear more into the studio, into the actual performance in that respect, on the Mofi, and you hear more of the kind of the ethereal, compositional idea, if you like, the sort of spiritual idea, if you like, on the original. and you know, either one loses out on the other one, if you see what I mean. Like this one really lacks that kind of overall swelling and gushing and emotion and space, and just, you know, I don't think you'd be driven to tears by this one at all. This one you'll be driven to tears, but you know, like, I mean, the louder tracks like Los Endos, Dance on a Volcano, etc., they're on the crescendos, it does get messy. And on the, I mean, also I'll say, I mean, I think my first favourite song on the album, you know, when I was 15, was probably Ripples. I just thought it was achingly beautiful and romantic and wonderful. And now listening to Ripples on this original, it is quite worn, and it just sounds a bit wayward, really. On here, it's sort of, you know, it's more bolted down, grounded, but it just doesn't emotionally take off. You know, you don't leave the ground. You can't take off emotionally and fly and soar through the sky like a, you know, swallow soaring on the melodies and harmonies and the like. On this, you get it all. And as I said, it's maybe 95% as spacious as the original, but that's not to say it's worse spatially, because it's so rooted, and it's, you know, I'd say it's 100%, 110% on the rhythmic, on the weight, on the power. So it beats this in resolution, it beats it in depth, it beats it in body, it beats it in timing, it beats it in just about every aspect. Well, it does beat it in every aspect that there is to be beaten. And because of that, it takes the more sort of abstract compositional sort of, you know, the massive sort of the symphonic sort of, you know, quiet to loud and sensitivity and power and gentle, you know, ness of this, and it really enhances it. It really, really, really does. It's definitely, of all the Atlantic 75ths, it's definitely my favourite so far, probably alongside the Yes album, and just it's yeah, I think it is. I know we've had the Lamb Lies Down, and we've had Selling England. I think the sound quality of you know, 1976 Genesis was better than the sound quality of sort of 1973, 1974, 1972 Genesis, and it makes more of the Analogue Productions Atlantic 75th treatment, if you like. Now, it's a funny thing. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I think it was a Sunday night, UK time. And Chad Casson rang me up. I was like, wow, that's so cool. And was chatting to me and asked what Genesis albums I would add to the list that was on the Atlantic 75th series, because of course we've got we've had Selling England, we've had The Lamb, Nursery Crime, Foxtrot to come. I think there's Abacab to come. Now that's the one I think I would be, I mean, I will get it, but it's definitely not in my you know, top flight Genesis albums. And anyway, he was asking me about, you know, the various Genesis albums and which ones that aren't on the list that I would put on the list. And I was kind of torn between Genesis Live, which I think is wonderful musically, but it's you know, I've got an original pressing and it's not you know, it's not this sort of sound quality. Wind and Wuthering, which I don't think is as good an album as A Trick of the Tail, and I don't think it's stood the test of time quite as well. Trespass, which again, it's one that could do with an improvement in sound quality. Duke, and then there were three, and it would be one of those. having heard this, I've got to vote for Wind and Wuthering, because it's, you know, Wind and Wuthering is an amazing album. You've got Afterglow, you've got One for the Vine. I mean, it's, you know, it is amazing. And I think it needs this treatment too. But then again, I also think that he should do Trespass and he should do Genesis Live. I think we discussed Seconds Out, and it's the trouble is finding a place to split the sides. So, you know, maybe we can't have that. I wouldn't mind seeing a phenomenal version of Duke, because you know, it's definitely not the best Genesis album, but I saw them live in that year, and again, like I say about this particular album, that gives it a very, very, very special place in my heart. So anyway, to wrap up, the Analogue Productions Atlantic 75 Genesis, A Trick of the Tail, is utterly stunning. It blows the original absolutely out of the water, and it blows away the Mofi I've also had since, I think this was released in 81, and I probably bought it in the mid to late 80s. I mean, both of these, honestly, I don't think there's any, I won't be playing them again. I really think that. And often I say, you know, you get these new things and you play them, and, you know, you put them on when you're in the mood for really sitting down and delving deep into the sound quality. On these, there is just no chance I'm ever going to want to play these again. This absolutely annihilates them. It's not subtle. It's not by a small amount. It's phenomenal. It's almost worth me. I'm almost contemplating buying another copy to back up for in 10 years' time when I've worn this one out, you know? Although on that note, I don't think you wear out records if you keep your records clean and your stylus in good shape. But it's stunning. Absolutely stunning. One of the absolute best things I've heard. Honestly, had me like a squonk, just crying my eyes out. Okay, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye now. Bye.